Okay, so I know this is going to be a common trem system we're going to talk about here, but I'm going to kind of go over the stuff I don't see enough people talking about regarding this. This, of course, is the Floyd Rose locking tremolo system. This was the first kind of trem unit I used. I had quite a stiff learning curve when I first started playing guitar. The guitar we're showing this on today is my Kramer parts caster. It's a Focus 6000 neck with a Striker 300 ST body and a brand new Floyd Rose Special with the big brass block in it. So this is kind of like also a rudimentary beginner, show you how it works, how it goes together without actually taking the whole thing apart kind of video. I'm going to be doing a lot of these quick kind of 20-minute or less kind of videos on these vibratos because I figured kind of show you the tips, tricks, things I've learned over the years. You know, sort of a data dump. So I built this guitar not too long ago. It's kind of a clone of what my Red Focus 3000 was when it was used and not just completely modded the hell out. But we'll maybe talk about this guitar by itself in another video. So the tremolo here is the Floyd Rose Special. This is a new version of the Floyd Rose, or new-ish version that they make that's meant for the budget market. It's built just like the original 80s Floyd Rose tremolos with the fine tuners, just it's made in Korea. I highly recommend these. I think they're great. I have them on two of my guitars now. My Jagmaster is the other one. And I have an original German Floyd on my Focus 3000 with the special pivot points on it now. Anyway, the first thing we want to talk about, just to give you a brief history, Floyd Rose was started in Seattle by a guy named Floyd D. Rose. So yeah, that's his name. Floyd Rose was playing in a Jimi Hendrix cover band, or sort of the story goes, and his Stratocaster wouldn't stay in tune. He was also a jewelry maker, so he knew how to work with small metal assemblies like this and built his own locking tremolo system. The principle of this system is it works just like a Strat, or what we now call a two-point Strat trem. The original ones had like 6 screws here. We'll talk about that in another video. This rides on these two little pivot posts here. They're just by Allen screws on the modern versions. On the old versions, they were actually a flathead screwdriver. And basically it just rides on those just like a Strat. You have a little block that goes through the body out into the back here where that cover plate is. And it pulls on 2 to 5 springs to counteract the tension of the strings. So the big deal with Floyd Rose is his philosophy is a little bit different than what you'd use with a regular guitar trem, like, you know, a Strat trem, Mustang trem, Jaguar Jazzmaster, Bigsby, you know, anything that doesn't have this kind of thing at the headstock. The way Floyd's system works is they're called a double locking tremolo because you actually cut the ball ends off these strings and you clamp them into each saddle with these little clamps here, those little blocks. And I'll show you a little more about the assembly later. So each string clamps into these blocks at the end without a ball end, and then they're clamped at the other end at this piece called a locking nut. By each pair of strings, the E and the A, the D and the G, and the B and high E are all locked into place with these 3 screws here. And now let's get into the details. So, first off, you have it clamped at both ends, and the whole idea with this is that after your strings are properly stretched out, this is the first thing nobody talks about on these darn Floyd Roses, and I think it's a big reason a lot of people have problems with tuning. You still need to stretch your strings out when you have a Floyd Rose. And I'm talking, you need to do it just like I said to do for these guys with the Mustang tremolo. That's one reason I'm good with the Mustang trem, is because I'm good with the Floyd Rose. And so the way it works is, how I do it, when I restring a Floyd Rose after I've got them clamped in and tuned up to pitch, is I actually go down the string doing that, just like I do on my offsets, and then I do all the wild bar stuff, but I leave this unlocked. And I do this for 2 reasons. One, because I want the string balanced out so then there's no surprises, because my feeling is if I lock this nut here and then I stretch the string out, I'm only stretching out the part of the string that's here. And on a microscopic level, and that's how I think on these things, on a microscopic level, when you're tuning that low E flat, that unstretched section of string is going to feed out of the locking nut in this direction, and it's going to cause it to go flat. Whereas the other way, if you tune it sharp, it's going to go up here, and then all of a sudden you might have some tuning problems related to that as well. Now, I know the idea is to have these clamped down, but at the same time, you want the string stretched out so it stays in tune like it's supposed to, which right now it's not in tune at all. So when you stretch these strings out, you'll want to do it, and then you do without the nut locked, and I find then after you lock the nut, it stays in tune, and it will stay in tune, and you can be as nuts with that bar as much as you want. I mean, as aggressive and heavy-handed as possible. So that's the first tip I have for you with the Floyd Rose, is really make sure that this string is literally stretched out all the way to the tuner. And then when I say stretched out, I mean to equilibrium, meaning you need to have some ability for the string to contract, but contract consistently, because if it doesn't do that, you're going to hit the bar and do a bar dive, and that's going to come back up, and then your string's going to be sharp. So I'm very, 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 very practical about the way I do a restring on a Floyd Rose, because I want to make sure that stays in tune. Because, you know, this is the metal tremolo. This is the tremolo, you know, Kirk Hammett, Brad Gillis, you know, Paul Dean uses it to emulate a slide. Eddie Van Halen's the most famous player. Richie Sambora, you know. It's the only tremolo I know where you can literally go this far with the strings being slack, and then it pops back up and goes back in pitch. Which brings me to the next thing, floating or decked. For some of you people who might be new to this tremolo, this is set up as floating. You can even kind of tell because it does the Brad Gillis cricket thing. I just saw Night Ranger, so I've been on a bit of a kick with that sort of thing lately. So, anyway, floating, non-floating Floyd, typically one way you can tell is it doesn't have this extra route here. Now, on this Kramer Striker 300 ST, there were some older Floyds that were thicker called the Floyd Rose 2, and they had like replaceable knife edges in here that you could pull out and actually buy replacements for. It was meant to be a way to have a Floyd Rose that wouldn't wear out and cost you like $300 to replace as a starter. And nobody knew about the replaceable knife edges on the Floyd 2. I knew about it because I've actually pulled them out and swapped them on a couple. I have a few Floyd 2 guitars in my collection, including my 84 Kramer Striker, and my newer Explorer build has a Music Lily version of the Floyd Rose 2. And how you can tell also is a Floyd 2 from a regular Floyd is there's two versions of the Floyd 2. There's one with the clamp saddles like this, and then there's another called the single locking version where the strings feed through the back of these right here and come out the saddle, and it's just more like a top loader Squire Bullet hardtail bridge the way it's loaded, but it's still a tremolo. So floating means you can go up by pulling the bar up, or you can go down by pushing it down. It also means if you have good knife edges and you take good care of this, more on that in a bit, you can do all that wild Brad Gillis, you know, Steve kind of stuff with it. A decked Floyd is more of a setup like Eddie Van Halen had, and the playing technique with it was different. When Ed would do those, you know, upward pitches, he'd bend the bar down, then hit the note, and then pull it back up, as opposed to maybe like Brad Gillis, who just pulls it up. So that was the way Eddie did that. There's more than one way to set your Floyd up. And of course there's other versions of this, like the FRX and stuff. I'm not going to go into those because, you know, a little time and elaborateness. Another thing to watch with the Floyds, original German Floyds do not have this collar here unless it's been upgraded. This is the modern way of installing a tremolo bar on a Floyd Rose, is what they call the collared installation. You have the tip of the arm just fits down in here, and you have a collar. And actually, on the bottom of a genuine Floyd Rose with the collar set up, you actually have a set screw underneath that allows you to tighten this up so the bar is tight. which I think is a good segue into the next thing we need to talk about that's really important. How would you do these Brad Gillis kind of trem flutter cricket noise things? How does that work? Well, first and foremost, the most important thing, and this is really important, and yes, this makes setting one of these up a pain in the ass. I mean, a royal pain. Setting the action on a Floyd Rose. Never, ever, if you want to do the cricket noises, never, ever, 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 ever adjust the action with the Floyd Rose under string tension. And I know you're going to go, oh, but then how do I know how high to set it? How do I know? Well, yeah, it's tedious. Basically, if Kurt Cobain should have been critiquing anything for having to untune all the strings and then turn little screws, it would have been the Floyd Rose, not this thing up here where it just uses small Allen keys to adjust the action that almost nobody knew about in 1991. So, yeah, this thing, you have to loosen all the strings, take the springs out of the back, adjust these, hope you estimated it right, put it back in, and then adjust it. Now, you might be able to get away with a little bit of turning. I did just a little bit on this, not a whole lot. Just a little bit, but if you want that top level performance, you want to play Don't Tell Me You Love Me, you don't want to do that ever, because that's going to wear your knife edges out. These have to be perfect knife edges where the contact patch for the tremolo is as tiny as possible, and that reduces friction. All these tremolo units, your biggest enemy is friction, and when you have friction between these pivot points and this metal chassis, it can get pretty expensive, because then you have to replace these guys because they're all grooved up and messed up, and worst of all, the tail plate to this, which gets all mushroomed out, and then you pull the bar up and it's slightly sharp, and you push it down and it's slightly flat, and it doesn't want to return to zero. All tricks I learned on the Mustang, believe it or not. Yeah, so it's amazing how close the two are. So that's one of the first things. The older Floyd Rose trems. Oh, another piece goes to this whammy bar, and that was why I was saying it was a good segue. So as you can see, you want your bar tight. You don't want it flopping around. I mean, everybody who's seen Eddie Van Halen in the 80s, I mean, his bar was doing this the whole... you'd watch the Jump video, and he's got his whammy bar down there until he uses it, and it's just swinging around in the wind, the breeze. No. If you've ever watched the guys who do that kind of stuff, Steve Vai, Brad Gillis of Night Ranger... they have their whammy bar locked down really hard. That's another key thing to get those cricket type sounds out of the Floyd Rose, is because that you want everything on here, every part of this assembly except these two pivot posts, tight. You want it tight. You don't want any loose metal anywhere that's going to knock out the inertia. And another thing I found that really, really helped on this was that big brass block, because it gives it even... If you've ever seen the Fender diagrams for the Stratocaster tremolo, they call that block back there the inertia block. And it really does work as an inertia block. If you put the bigger brass blocks or titanium blocks, something with a heavier mass, it's going to do that a lot better than it is with the standard steel ones. But I wouldn't knock the original inertia blocks. They work great too. They all work great for this sort of thing. And that was another thing I want to talk about, the block in the back with concerns of the tremolo. Like you can see in this, my big brass block has plenty of room to move, but if you have a minimal route, you might need to widen that hole going into the back of the guitar to get the block. You can also see my collared adjustment there. So that kind of explains the tremolo side. Another thing I want to explain, and yeah, we're going to use Brad Gillis's name a lot in this video because he's one of the guys who uses Floyd's I know the most about. You'll notice he doesn't have fine tuners, and Floyd Rose has finally reissued a version of the non-fine tuner Floyds. And I wanted to kind of explain why fine tuners were introduced. And it has to do with the locking nut up here. So in a genuine Floyd Rose, if you've ever taken a look at the way the locking nut is milled, that is not flat, that is curved. It goes at a curve here, like that. And the strings gently follow that gentle curve down and underneath the string bar. So if you have a old Kramer like this, you had this string bar because what its job was not to pull the strings down for better tension over the nut for the purpose of sustain or for the purpose of them not flying out of the nut, but rather it was meant to go there to pull them down against the nut harder. So then when you clamp these down, if you have like the strings going all straight and AWOL like this, and then you go clamp it down and it's got an extra bit of string there, it's going to pull that string sharp. And then you end up with a problem down here when you had a non-fine tuner Floyd Rose. So anyone who has a non-fine tuner Floyd, you want to make sure you get this set up absolutely good. As you can see, I have a very good breakover on this, so nothing goes sharp when I clamp the nut. It just clamps down, it locks the strings in place, and it does a good job. And, you know, but they added these fine tuners because these things are a hassle. And yes, it's a lifestyle. Having a Floyd Rose is kind of a lifestyle, I must admit. As one who's had one for over 30 years on a Kramer Focus 3000 that I play quite a bit. I mean, you're going to have to carry hex wrenches with you all the time. On my original Kramer, I actually slotted the nut slots so I could put them in here and do it with a screwdriver, because it was easier to carry something like this around than it was to remember to carry one of these little teensy-weensy tiny hex wrenches around. Another thing I wanted to talk about, fretboard radiuses and nuts and stuff. So this guitar, most old Kramers usually have an R1 or R2 42 millimeter wide locking nut that's got a shallow depth. And they usually bolt in through the back with these two holes back here, with bolts through the back. Newer locking nuts, as I'll show you in a minute, screw down through the top, and there's several different versions, like an R3 and an R4, and they can be 43 millimeter, and they're deeper, and some of them are designed to go on a Gibson style headstock, which actually I have a couple of those in my parts bin over here, where I keep all my extra guitar parts. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Here's a R3 locking nut base. This is what the base of a locking nut looks like. The Floyd Rose units actually have these threaded through the back, so you can attach them with screws through the top or through the back. At least the newer Floyd Rose bases do. The old ones were just threaded. As you can see here, this is about the same depth as this one. I mean, roughly. Let's take a look at them side by side. You can see the depth is pretty close, but this is a little bit deeper. And same thing for this one. And they can get even deeper. I mean, you got some of them that are even taller than that. But yeah, that's kind of a rundown of the Floyd Rose and how it kind of goes together. And again, it's still a good idea to wrap your strings neatly around the tuning peg heads. There's a lot of other, esoteria to it. But yeah, mostly with these. Another hint I can give you, do not use anything heavier than maybe an 11 with these unless you're tuning down. When I was in high school, one of the ways I screwed my original Kramer up, and I had to put a Kaler on it for a while until I engineered my own way of getting around it, and we'll talk about that piece next. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a longer video. These right here, so these two posts caved into the bridge pickup cavity. And that was a really common problem, especially with like the Focus 3000 and some of these Kramer guitars where the humbucker was really close to the bridge. I mean, Kramer Berettas and maybe Eddie's 5150, not so much, but these where there's not enough meat between the bridge and the bridge pickup, it really causes a problem for these pivot posts to cave in. So now let's explore some more solutions and stuff like that I'm going to talk about how these bridges work, because I actually have one for a guitar I'm building to kind of show you. And we're also going to talk about licensed Floyds. So now we're going to talk about how these are mounted inside the guitar. Right here we have your garden variety Chinesium licensed Floyd Rose locking tremolo like you'd find on eBay. This is where I'm going to kind of talk to you about a few more details and talk to you about licensed Floyd Rose tremolos a little bit. Now, licensed Floyd Rose are not my first choice. I'm going to say they can be hit or miss. Some of these are made out of really shitty pot metal and they don't stay in tune very well and they don't float well. Some of these, they work great. Some of them actually seem to be based on original Floyd Rose tooling. The main problem with these is the metal that the base is made out of, and the pivot posts. Now, remember what I said about caving in the Floyd Rose tremolo cavity? This is one of the solutions for that. This is a metal bar that fits into the body of the guitar and allows you to have your Floyd Rose pivot posts also screwed in. So you can see the pivot posts fit into these bushings here, and then these bushings press into the body. You might want to recess this into the body if you want the full action adjustment, or you want to have a decked Floyd where it actually goes all the way down to the body. So that's kind of the way this works, and you can kind of see how it mounts on here. And basically what it does is it allows you to have the pivot posts right there on your Floyd Rose. It allows you to have it pivot on this metal bracket, which gives it a little more strength, and it causes it not to cave into the body because now you got 2 more screws holding it in place. We'll talk about routing in a minute too. This is a licensed Floyd Rose. As you can see, the pivot posts are the knife edges right here. These are actually only just slightly worn. I'm going to do this in a decked application, so it doesn't matter. One thing I wanted to also talk about here is block depth. This is a cast magnesium block like you'd find on a licensed Floyd. That's another way to tell you have one of those. Usually the licensed ones, a lot of them will have these gaps in here. You also can tell a licensed Floyd or a Floyd Rose 2 because those are the only ones that have only 2 holes instead of 3 for intonation adjustment. Intonation, by the way, is adjusted by loosening these screws and then using a special tool back here or some pliers with tape on them or something to pull a saddle forward and back while you loosen it and then get it adjusted in the right position. Then you clamp it back down. I usually do, this is like gross intonation adjustment before I install it, so it's roughly in the right spot. And then when I put the tremolo in, once the guitar is put together, it's all going to get, put together and working. Oh, and by the way, your fine tuners, here's how those work. So when you screw these down, as you can see, it pushes this lever down. This little piece back here is needed. Yes, the strings will pull it back up, but it also helps. This is a spring that pulls your bridge saddles back up, because as you can see here, when you use the fine tuner, it pushes that down and pulls it back up. On older Floyds, sometimes you had a problem if you moved this saddle as far back as it needs to go sometimes, and it wouldn't go down enough. It also can cause a problem if you're using like an EVH detuna, which is a little device you put on the low E and you pull it out. I have one on my old red Kramer that I use quite a bit. So these blocks, one more piece of info to take from this, and yes, it's disorganized ad hoc video, and this is a little longer than I'd planned. These little blocks here come in 3 lengths. They come in 32, 37, and 42, I believe. 32 is what this is. 32 is meant for things like a Fender Mustang, your Gibson SG, anything with a thin body like this. I mean, if I wanted to, I could put it on something like that Harmony that's pink back there. That's what you use it for. Your 32s are used for that. The 37 is used on guitars like this with the Floyd 2, where it's recessed into the body, but it's not necessarily upward travel meant. It's just meant to be recessed because it's a taller, thicker unit. Although I exploited that on this Floyd by putting a Floyd Special that floats on this, but you can do that. Floyd Rose parts are pretty interchangeable. And then you have the longer one, which is about 42 millimeters, so it's about yay long, and that's meant for your standard Strat thickness guitars like that with a decked vibrato, or floating ones like this. This has a 42 in it, and it works great. So you want to be mindful of about how long your block is. The guitar this is going in is using a 32 because it's thinner than standard thickness, and therefore plenty of room for this in that guitar without this bottom piece, the inertia block sticking out of the back. One of the upgrade pieces now are the new brass block for the Floyd Rose. The big brass block is what they call them. They also make them out of like titanium and stainless steel and all these different metals. Tone wood, snake oil type shit. And it basically like, oh, it gives you more sustain. I don't see that as a benefit. I see the benefit more being the weight of the metal in use. Like, this is decent. I mean, but it doesn't add a lot of wobble. Like I said, you know, it's all, that adjustment is all about, you know, the Brad Gillis kind of wobble. And by the way, just to address any possible haters that walk in here, this is just a Playboy cover. It's not the actual magazine. And by the way, my wife hung that up too. So, yeah. That's how you know you have a cool wife. Anyway, getting back here. We're going to talk about... We're going to reshoot this, I think.